I told the court that I'm wrongfully imprisoned.
Mr. Sue, you are not
you
to
have to
address
hear
the
me.
jury.
There's too much being hid from you.
He needs to be taken out of the court.
There's too much.
He was one small man in a giant wheel caught.
Well, I do wish to say that it's official that I'm wrongfully imprisoned right now.
Uncover, Season 7, Dead Wrong.
I asked him if he killed Pippo. He said yes, and I'd be next.
Available on CBC Listen and wherever you get your podcasts. This is a CBC podcast.
There is excitement in the air, you know the kind I'm talking about. Students reuniting with classmates and teachers in person and hoping for a clean slate as they begin a new grade. But there is plenty of trepidation as well. Learning during this pandemic has not been easy on anyone, and for some it's taken a heavy toll, not only on their marks, but on their mental health as well. In a few moments, we'll hear from a lead researcher on pandemic learning loss and how to get back on track. We'll also talk with a psychiatrist about how to support kids as school resumes. But first, Graham Hopkins, grade 12 student in Saskatoon, has launched a petition asking high schools to return to the regular semester system they operated under before COVID. Graham, good morning.
Good morning.
It's been a minute since I've been in school, but as I remember, the semester system had students taking 4 courses for half the year and then 4 courses for the other half of the year. How did that change in Saskatoon during COVID?
Well, in Saskatoon, in the 2020 to 2021 year, our local school division implemented a timetable called the Quint timetable. And in this, we would take the same number of courses we would usually take, which is 10, so a couple more than Ontario. But we would take 2 courses in each day, and each course would occupy about 2 hours for the better part of the year. And we would have about 2 months with each set of 2 classes before switching out to a new one. So there were 5 quints of the year, and each quint would last about 2 months.
What did that mean in terms of learning? And what would happen if, for example, it's a lot more compressed, but if you started to fall behind in one of those classes, what did that mean?
If you were to fall behind, especially in some of the heavier courses, more academic courses, such as the maths or sciences, it could mean catastrophic results for you and for your grades. And those effects would start to appear almost immediately because there is no time given almost for you to recover from anything or for you to prepare for anything because these courses are going by so quickly. You would have a unit that would normally take about a few weeks to complete, and now you're doing it in a couple days. So if you're behind on something, if you even realize you're behind, which may not even happen in and of itself, but if you realize you're behind, you have an extremely narrow window to correct whatever mistake has been made or whatever lack of understanding you may have.
What happened with your grades last year?
I passed with high marks in a few classes, but in a few others, I passed with a 60% in one, a 50% in the other, and I failed another class.
That sounds really stressful.
Yeah, it was. It consumes every part of your life, and you don't have time for anything else, and it's really draining on you and on your peers, and it's just a very toxic thing for your mental health and for your education as well.
Were you offered any extra help? Did the board or your teachers give students anything different, given the fact that, as you say, the timeline is so compressed, and if you start to slip, you're behind the 8 ball before you even notice it?
Yeah, so at least for my school, and I imagine this is the case for other individual schools as well, but when it came to giving students extra help or support to allow them to adapt to this timetable, it was all up to the teachers. And if a teacher doesn't have time for you for any reason, then it's going to be catastrophic for you. And even if the teacher is able to give you extra help, there is no structured support systems in place. There were none that year. And unfortunately, it looks like that is also the case with this year. Once again, they're not implementing any support systems.
I was going to say, what sort of supports would you want this year, given the fact that you have this petition, but the school board in Saskatoon hasn't changed its position on semesters? So what supports would you want?
If they are so convinced that they want quarters, I would compel them to do the necessary work to accomplish what they want. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If they want to alter the timetable so drastically, they need to understand that is going to come with some sacrifices. They're going to have to divert some funding towards structured supports. I think more school counselors, structured homework help sessions, even paying the teachers for the extra time they're going to be undertaking to help their students. I think any one of these things, and especially them in concert with each other, could really make a difference. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen, at least not anytime soon.
Just before I let you go, you're in grade 12. It's a big year. What do you think this year is going to look like for you school-wise?
It changes every day for me. I'm having to really take a close look at the courses I'm taking because I now have the understanding that it is essentially impossible for most students to take any of the maths or sciences. So it may be that I will drop those courses entirely and take them again next year. It may be that I take them in a private school. I haven't decided yet, but I do know that I will definitely not be taking any of those courses in this quadmester model they've devised.
I wish you the best. I mean, it's a lot, and just school's difficult at the best of times. Grade 12 is a big year, but you have a lot on your plate, so good luck.
Thank you.
Graham Hopkins, grade 12 student. He was in Saskatoon. Falling grades, soaring stress. For many students, these are just, as we're hearing, some of the byproducts of COVID-19 school disruptions over the past 18 months. It's not just students saying that more supports are needed. Educators are saying that as well, and that they're needed right now to cope with the effects and set kids up for success. Tracy Vaillancourt is a Canada Research Chair in Children's Mental Health and Violence Prevention at the University of Ottawa. She's also a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada, and she helped author a recent policy briefing on children and schools during COVID-19. Tracy, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's interesting. Graham used the word catastrophic a couple of times. In your policy briefing, you say, we are on the cusp of a generational catastrophe that requires swift action to mitigate the harm. That's a really stark warning about what's going on right now. What concerns you the most about what's unfolding in the schools over the course of this pandemic?
My concern was so well articulated by Graham. He really said what our concerns are. It has COVID-19 and school closures and the disruptions to education have affected virtually all aspects of development. So it's not just my concerns with mental health, the deterioration of mental health, or the peer relations, the isolations and the like, but also what happened in schools, the learning gaps that we're seeing. 90% of the world kids were out of school. 5.7 million Canadian children were out of school at some point. And these unprecedented disruptions in education led to disengagement, chronic attendance problems, declines in academic achievement, decreases in credit attainment. And this was an impact that was borne disproportionately to those who were already at risk before the pandemic was declared as such.
Do we know yet to what extent kids in Canada have fallen behind? I mean, anecdotally, you'll hear that, but is there evidence yet showing how far kids slipped because of the disruptions in the school that you were laying out?
We do have some evidence. So the world evidence is actually better than the Canadian evidence. We don't have a national data set where we can compare provinces and territories, and that's a real miss on our part. But we do know from school boards who've looked at this, so there's been like these little pockets of information that we can gather from. And what it looks like, it seems to be that there's going to be a learning shortfall, and it's widening. It's going to be greater for students who had lower achievement before the pandemic. And so we're looking at about 3 to 3.5 months of a gap in learning for typical performing children and youth, and a 1-year gap in children and youth who were lower performing before the pandemic.
It's not to suggest that this hasn't created incredible stress. You just heard it from Graham there. But does it help that everyone's in the same boat in some ways, that all students or a majority of students found themselves, I mean, there were different situations, but found themselves in an unusual situation?
There should be, it should help. Having a shared reality does help. We know from the research that offshoots and atypical cases tend to be, there's the stigma attached to that as well. That can be quite problematic. But that said, what we need, and what Graham, your first guest, was suggesting, is that we need to intervene, and we need to intervene quickly to address these educational gaps. And so he made a number of suggestions, and we made a number of suggestions in our report. And our report is extensive. Our report deals from everything from ventilation to how to manage inequality and how to access free internet in Canada. So, I mean, we need to be thinking about this quickly, broadly, and in a systematic fashion.
I want to come back to the marks in a moment, because that's a lot of parents and students obviously feel that if they see their marks slipping. But you also talk about the emotional disruption here and say that, children have a fundamental need to belong, and that this has disrupted that in some way. What is the emotional effect and the emotional disruption that not being in the classroom with your friends and your colleagues has over the course of many months?
I think we've made the mistake of thinking that schools are just about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and they've never been just about the 3 R's. We argue that the first R of education is relationships. So just broadly, what do schools do? And then I'll talk about the need to belong. So schools provide opportunities for learning and engagement. We know this, but in areas that we don't think about traditionally, like the arts, the natural world, current events, sexual health, digital literacy. They provide food resources for children and youth when they're in need. They provide disability supports. They constitute a rich setting in which to develop social competencies. And social competencies are inextricably linked to doing well in school. So the tasks of learning are socially mediated. And what we did during the pandemic with all our school closures is we took away that, right, that social context. And so now children are learning in isolation at home. They're lonely, their fundamental need to belong is not met, their mental health is declining for many, and then we expect them to do well. And then they don't do well, and we should not be surprised.
And so in the last couple of minutes that we have, I mean, many of us parents were hoping that this would be a more normal school year, and whether that unfolds in that way will remain to be seen. But the concern is that given that learning loss, will kids be able to make up ground? What needs to happen immediately to ensure that kids don't fall further behind emotionally and when it comes to the education piece?
So my concern is that we're going to be so worried about learning achievement gaps that we're going to come in and ignore all the other things that need to be addressed. I think the first thing we need to do is attend to their social emotional needs and their mental health. And once we get everybody comfortable and ready to learn, then we need to start developing programs. We have programs already in place, so actually they don't need to be developed, but should be having programs that are meant to combine with what we're already doing in order to get them caught up. So I say this again with a lot of caveats, because we don't want kids to be staying after school in their desk to learn more. We don't want them sitting in summer school to learn more at a desk and not experiencing their world and not having fun and the like. So we need to be mindful of how this is going to look. And so what we've proposed is that we should be doing things like small group offerings during the school day, virtual supports provided before or after school, summer camps with a combination of play, high quality recreation, and academics. We've been doing this before. We can do it again. I just don't want to deliver. Can you imagine if all the kids in Canada had to go to summer school? It just would be, I can't imagine that being the way to go when they're already stressed. They've already given up so much during this pandemic. I don't think we should be asking for too much more. And what we do ask, we need to always keep in mind that learning happens in relationships.
Tracy, great to speak with you about this. A lot to think about as the school year gets underway. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tracy Vinecourt is Canada Research Chair in Children's Mental Health and Violence Prevention at the University of Ottawa, also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada.
Right now, our lives are on our phones. And with our phones full of live-streamed exercise classes, midday work calls, and nightly family video calls, there's no room for fraud calls. Thankfully, AT&T makes customer security a priority, helping block those pesky calls. It's not complicated. AT&T Active Armor, 24/7 proactive network security and fraud call blocking to help stop threats at no extra charge. Compatible device/service required. Visit AT&T.com/activearmor for details.
I'm David Ridgen, and this is The Next Call. In September 1996, Melanie Ethier disappeared from northeastern Ontario. Her mother, Celine, is still searching for answers.
I can't let it go. I need to find her. She deserves that much.
I follow every tip and every theory. Investigations that could break wide open with The Next Call. Available now on the CBC Listen app and everywhere you get your podcasts.
Feels like a lot to handle, especially considering it's only September. Taking care of students and staff's mental health is going to be more important than ever this year. Dr. Yusra Ahmad is a psychiatrist, clinical lecturer in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto. Doctor, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
This is not a normal school year, and the pandemic is in many ways the elephant in the room. As the school year gets started, what do you think teachers should be thinking about when it comes to addressing the emotional needs that students have as this year kicks off? We've just been talking about how you can't separate in many ways those emotional concerns from education concerns.
That's correct. And so on that note, I would encourage all educators to create space early as people return to school, as students get back into the classroom, to have a conversation about the effects of the pandemic on our kids, to allow them the opportunity to speak up and to share the ways in which they have already been coping with this challenging situation.
What about parents? Do you think parents need to check their expectations, given the reality that students are facing right now, that they might have seen marks slip perhaps over the last, year and a bit, but we're in a different situation right now. And so what do parents need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I think a healthy amount of compassion all around is what we need as a society and as parents as well. Compassion and understanding for the adversities that our kids are facing, as Graham so beautifully articulated. And I'm so proud of someone like him for, advocating for the needs of himself and his peers in that way. So yes, what matters most at the end of the day is our health and safety. And so let's prioritize that. And then in terms of other issues, such as the learning gaps that have emerged, those will correct themselves in time. But let's really focus on health and safety, especially emotional well-being.
Do you worry that the learning gaps will dominate the conversation, that the balance will be tipped in favor of that, and that perhaps some of those emotional gaps may be not taken as seriously or with the weight that they deserve?
I am concerned about that because that's the easiest piece to be talking about. And I think people tend to jump to things that can be measured. And so if we're looking at grades, these are numbers and you can see the decline. And so it's something, relatively easy that you can point to and talk about. But it's the intangibles that really matter. I love what Tracy had to say, which is the importance of relationship. In terms of the quality of our lives, there's a direct correlation between that quality and the quality of our relationships.
What would you say to students, if you're speaking with Graham or other students who have a lot of anxiety as they get into this new school year? What would you say to them?
I would first of all acknowledge that it's okay for them to be experiencing anxiety, for people to be struggling. It is, in fact, to be expected, given the nature of what we're facing. I mean, really, this has been a global trauma that everyone is experiencing in different ways, and it's touching people's lives in all kinds of in different manners. So I would respect that people are struggling. That's the first step, acknowledgement and acceptance of the situation. And it's only then that you can start to address it.
And it's not just students, and it's not just parents, but it's educators as well, they're also feeling the weight of that stress.
Absolutely. I think teachers for a long time have had to be more than just teachers. They've had to be, mentors and social workers, and they're so critical in the development of our children and our young people. Any one of us who's gotten to where we're at, including myself, it's because of amazing teachers that helped us along. And now there's this added pressure of, making sure the classroom is in clean and people are engaging in proper hand hygiene and taking care of the added anxieties of social distancing. And as well as in some classrooms, people are doing concurrent virtual teaching while doing in-person as well. There's a lot to handle here for teachers.
We just have a minute or so left. I know that you also lead a mindfulness group therapy program. What is focusing on the breath in a moment like this, where there's a lot of stress? What does that give teachers and students and parents as well?
It's extremely powerful because, first of all, with a lot of us wearing masks, we may not be breathing as deeply as we used to. We may be engaging in shallower breathing, and that tends to increase the carbon dioxide in our bloodstream, which can actually trigger the chemoreceptors in our brainstem to send red alert signals to our body that heighten anxiety and tell us that we're deprived of oxygen. So learning to breathe deeply is actually very helpful in a moment like this. In addition, it helps us to anchor ourselves in the present moment, which is a useful strategy when our minds start to spin out of control. Because you can't breathe for the past and you can't breathe for the future. You can only breathe right here, right now.
Something worth remembering as the school year gets set to begin right here, right now. Doctor, good to speak with you. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Yusra Ahmed is a psychiatrist, clinical lecturer in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto, and she also is the creator of Mindfully Muslim, a group therapy program.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.